Good afternoon, everyone, or let everyone get logged in, but we are excited to have today's webinar with our speaker all the way from California. So we'll get started in just a moment as I see people are logging in. It is bright and early for Mark in California, but noon, good lunch hour for us. So everyone just get settled and logged in. My name is Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us. My name is Becky Magdaleno. I'm your CEO of AI Florida. Thank you for joining us during your lunch hour today, for those of you that are on the East Coast. You will get a learning unit for today's presentation. You do not need to put anything in the chat or the Q&A. We can see your log in and log out based on when you come in and out. So there's nothing needed on your side. And we will take questions at later in this presentation. So if you do have any questions, you could put them in the Q&A and we will be monitoring that. And with that, I will turn it over to Mark to get us started.
Well, good morning or afternoon, everybody. 9 o'clock here, 12 o'clock elsewhere. I want to thank everybody for joining today. This should be hopefully a somewhat entertaining and certainly educational experience for all of us. Before we get started, I wanted to just give a little comment out to everybody in Florida that hopefully you're all doing well based on the 2 hurricanes that have come through. It's an awful lot of devastation and impact to everybody's lives back there. I just want to give everybody the best wishes if you've been impacted by it. I know that just like AIA Florida is in Tallahassee, my brother and his wife are in Tallahassee, so I've been paying attention to what's going on back there. So not good, but hopefully things will get back to normal in the near future. I'm going to go off video here in a second, just so things run more smoothly, but I just wanted to let you know that. And we're going to get going on leading vulnerable and complex projects. As Becky noted, it will be one learning unit, and I want to thank Becky and AIA Florida for helping host this. All right. So as normal with all these fun presentations, is protected by the US copyright laws and reproduction, et cetera. So not allowed without permission from me, but I'm sure we don't have to worry about that. And it is a registered AIA-CES program. As Becky has also mentioned, you guys will be able to get credit for those that are true AIA members. And we're going to move forward to, here's the speaker. It's me. It's Mark Steppen. I'm the Director of Architecture and Quality Control for an architectural firm in Oakland and Long Beach called Studio T Square. I'm also the current 2-time treasurer and two-time past president of the AIA East Bay, and I've been on the board there for going on about 11 years now. I also gave this talk to the AIA conference in 23 in San Francisco. So what are our learning objectives that we're going to get into today? Hopefully you'll be able to identify steps that define such vulnerable projects. We'll be able to go over organization and approach to joining a vulnerable project, maybe midstream, not at the beginning, not at the end, and how to plan the necessary leadership steps to deal with that and support the team. We're going to discuss summarizing project learning into a retrospective, and we're going to go over the leadership techniques to support the team, build the staff, build trust, and build engagement. So here we go. Leading vulnerable and complex projects. So this is really a session to identify, as I mentioned, the techniques for determining such projects. We're going to discuss their basic issues and some techniques that I have found work well for managing these project types. And before we get into sort of the agenda of this topic, I think one of the important things to understand is that, at least in my mind, pretty much every project you come across in some fashion is a vulnerable project. I know the title is vulnerable and complex. Not every project is totally complex. And complexity has a variety of definitions as well. But every project at some point has a vulnerability period. And depending on what that level is and what is being vulnerable at that time, it could be a real risk management situation for your firm. And so while these are not issues that you think of when you go to school or when you get put on a project or as you're managing a project as being important and critical to both the project, the firm, or the staff's success, they really are that important to your ability to execute a project and still teach everybody and grow your staff in your office at the same time. So moving on to the agenda, it's really about process of what we're gonna, of how you manage a project. There certainly are lots of books on project management. This is not something that you generally find in one of those books. This is about soft skills and paying attention and listening. I talk first about identification. How do you identify a vulnerable project? We're going to move from there into a brief discussion on engagement. Engagement talks about team investment and how you can improve your project team's engagement and morale and how through mentoring and appropriate oversight, you can get a vulnerable project to be more successful. So that moves then you into leadership skills. You're going to need to support your team. And that is true, even if you're not the person managing the project, you still have a support role as any staff member in office on a project. We're going to talk about communication skills, which are all part of this main subject here. It's really about soft skills that I don't think, for the most part, we're really taught in any point during our careers. I know I don't think I was, but I think over time I've grown to understand how some of these skills are very important and then started to pay more attention to them as I grew more into my ability to lead people in projects. Continuing, I'm going to show you an example of a project retrospective that I put together. It's just a simple recording of the history of the project, but it talks about things that went well and didn't go well, and we'll get into that briefly. It's a good way of recording the process that occurred on a particular project and how that worked or didn't work and things to learn from that so you can actually take advantage of the experience that was gained during that project. We're going to discuss, I'm going to come up with discuss a vulnerable project example. And what is it that was in this particular project that made it vulnerable? And what's the approach? What's an effective approach? And what process changes we could possibly put into play that would help us. And then in conclusion, we'll talk about, what did we learn? What are the soft skills that we feel need to be improved by everybody? And so here we go. We're going to hold questions to the end, but please, if you have some, that'd be great. Identification. How do you identify a vulnerable project? What kind of issues would you have? You could have team issues, okay? That's internal or external. In internal team issues, you might have situations where any part of your team could lack experience in the type of project you're talking about. Let's say it's a multifamily housing project, new construction, and none of your drawing staff have any experience with this, or they're very new to this project type. So there's going to be a high reliance on either your job captain or your project architect, or your project manager, or a combination thereof to really provide good leadership on what goes into a project like this. And what is it that makes this project work well from a documentation standpoint? And how do your meetings work? And all of these kinds of things that go into every single project. But when you have that lack of experience, if you don't provide good oversight onto those folks, you run the risk of a lot of things slipping through the cracks. And if you don't pay attention, you don't notice this until it might be too late. There can be trust issues. You may have PM that doesn't trust the PA, or the team staff doesn't trust the PM for a variety of reasons. They could be personal, they could be project related, they could be past project experience related. We're all people. We are all human. We have emotions, we have feelings. Things could happen within an office that throw these relationships off. Well, if the relationship is off, that affects the ability to document and learn and communicate and participate in a successful project. So those are all basic examples of some things that could be identified as vulnerability points. There could be concerns with the PM or PA leadership, as the slide notes, that you might have a PM that you really had no choice but to put on the project because there was nobody else available, but they might not have really all the relevant experience on that project type. And they try their best, but they just don't have the inherent knowledge of maybe the best way to approach how to document a lot of the conditions or how to work with their team. You know, every project type has got its own nuances, both in the documentation, the design, the resolution, but in how you communicate and what you communicate. Clients are different, consultants are different, and it is always, of course, a challenge to understand how to navigate all of that. But all of those instances create potential for vulnerability. External team issues. Well, those include things like, what if you have a project that's got 3 different clients? They all have different components and needs and desires in the project outcome, but their needs might be enough different that they sometimes slightly conflict with each other. And you can have conditions where you might have a developer and a contractor, and they're separate arms of the same overall entity, and their goals aren't necessarily the same, and they can be at odds with each other. That makes it a real challenge for the design team to handle issues, changes, direction. You know, sometimes that's just really challenging. And that can have an impact on the ability of the team to successfully navigate making decisions and getting them approved and getting the consultants to be on the same page and all those things that, again, make a project have a point of vulnerability. This can be in schematics, this can be in DD, it can be in CD. Might have some team members that for whatever reason are just very negative about the project or negative about their leadership outside the project. You might have consultants that really are not the best choice, but that's somebody that the firm that the client insisted you use, and that you maybe had bad experiences with. So then you have to navigate how to get past that and become a real team. If you're not a team, you're not going to be as successful. And so a less successful team is a vulnerability spot. That opens the door for risk. Everything that we're talking about in some fashion opens the door for risk to your firm. And lastly, on identifying what could be vulnerable is if you don't have good communication. internally or externally in this case. Uh, and I'm talking about every kind of communication that's on the phone, that's emails, that's, text messages. I mean, some clients text you, some contractors text you. Um, it's the internal team meetings, it's the internal meetings with leadership of the firm. Whatever it is, you need. And in this case, I am talking about external, but if you do not have quality and consistent communication, you are opening the door for a point of vulnerability that really would be best not having. Let's move on now to engagement. So in engagement, we're talking about a collaborative environment. And you're going to be working really to make sure that your team, if you're leading a project or if you're leading the firm, and you have all your teams, you need engagement and you need team investment. Just like the picture on the slide, you've got people communicating to each other. They appear to be happy to be talking, and they're working on resolving issues. And they're doing it out in front of others so the people are aware of what might be going on. If you don't develop a collaborative and engaging environment, it can be very difficult to have truly successful projects in the end, because you might be getting the documentation done, but you don't really develop your staff. And if you don't develop your staff and your own leaders' knowledge and ability to lead that staff, then you will have issues further down the road. So you want to do things such as improving the staff morale. And how do you do that? Well, you have open communication. You might be taking, difficult emails or negative communications from a client. And you as the leader, let's say you're the PM, you're going to take that and you're going to have the backs of everybody on your team. But you also need to let them know what you're doing. Communicate the issues, communicate how you're protecting them, let's say, and then work together to solve the issues that maybe you're taking the brunt of. But then when you work together, because of that team investment, you're going to be improving, hopefully, the morale of your staff. Well, through that effort, you're also mentoring and teaching. And frankly, so much of what we do on a daily basis is mentoring and teaching, whether we know we're doing it or not, whether it's intentional or whether it's subconscious. And so these things are really important to the ability of a team to function at its highest level. You can increase team responsibilities. Increasing responsibilities might mean you as the leader of the team have to divest some of your responsibilities, and you start to show trust in the other folks on your team. It really, in the end, I don't think works very well to continue to pigeonhole people on projects. They won't grow, you won't grow, and frankly, you'll get overworked as the leader. I know personally, over time, I've really had to learn how to let go of work and not try to do too much myself. And I've had to learn how to trust others, even sometimes when I'm not sure I should. But then I figured out how to talk with them about what I need to do, what I need them to do, and the trust that I'm placing in them to do certain things, and then have check-ins and then have meetings with them and see how things are going. And don't just kind of throw something on them and let them sink or swim without the engagement that they need from you. So by doing all these things that I'm talking about here in engagement, you are improving morale, you're teaching, you're increasing team's responsibilities, you're showing respect, you're exhibiting trust, and hopefully you're actively listening to what they your staff, your leadership, your consultants, or your client might have to say that will affect how you lead a project. Generally speaking, I think if people enjoy what they're doing most of the time and feel like they're being trusted and being respected, their work will be better. As a consequence, your potential for the project having as many vulnerable points goes down. Okay, so past engagement, we talked about it in both the prior two slides. We're talking about leadership. We're talking about leading and supporting. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are lots of books on how to manage projects, critical path methods, all kinds of ways to get very, technically into management techniques. I wanted to talk about sort of the basis behind all this seminar are two articles that I wrote, part 1 and part 2 of Leading Vulnerable and Complex Projects. And a lot of it is really talking about what we've done so far, is understanding points of vulnerability and understanding that it's soft skills that are a really important component in being a good leader and being able to handle projects, simple or complex, to minimize vulnerability. Minimizing vulnerability and going through these efforts, one, makes you a better leader, makes your staff better, and then the end result is a better project. But it's also better relationships that you're continuing to always develop with your consultants, which are very critical, but especially your clients, because you're showing them you're trusted your team and you're trusted them and how to manage their situation. Because you're their trusted advisor. We use these terms in marketing, right? And so I think that going through these efforts really helps that. So you're going to lead and support your team. What's kind of important here? I think leading without ego, generally speaking, works really well. I was at a awards ceremony last week from Engineering News Record, and I was chatting with a very important and famous architect who was making a point to somebody else about how he doesn't need to be the lead dog. He doesn't want to show ego. He very specifically makes sure that he's just part of the team. Okay, he really is making a lot of the main decisions, but he's not approaching it from the standpoint of, I'm the guy, you guys follow me. It's, we're doing it together. I think that generates a lot of respect. So you're going to lead with that respect, but you're lead with empathy on how other people are feeling and doing, and how to work with every person. And every person is an individual, and every individual has a different way of processing information, communication, criticism, etc. And you have to learn how to understand that and not treat everybody the same, because we're not all the same. One of the critical aspects of good leadership is tackling negative issues, whether those are internal or external, and how you handle those and how you portray them to your team and how you show the trust in them and the trust to your firm leadership that you're handling these things and communicating them clearly, being stern and strong when you need to be, but always diplomatic. Being diplomatic doesn't mean you can't push back. Doesn't mean you can't push back to a client. Doesn't mean you can't ask for extra services when you believe you should. Doesn't mean you can't push back to a consultant who's not cooperating, getting you documents on time or understanding their scope. Again, thanks goes to communicating clearly. Want to enjoy the journey of our profession. It's an amazing profession, and it's very, very complicated, right? And it's never the same. It keeps changing. The world's changing around us in ways that we don't have a lot of control over sometimes. And we're creating spaces and environments for the future, current future. And so we should enjoy that instead of, sometimes getting too tied up in the negativity of things that can occur, or just the complexity of some of these projects or situations. I think the more you enjoy it, the better you will do at leading and teaching. And so with this leadership, you're leading by example of how you communicate. This could be as simple as people in your office hearing you on the phone, talking to a client, talking to a consultant. How you communicate with them sets the stage for how these other people, the rest of your staff, understands, oh, this is how I should communicate. Even if they're not actively being told, listen to me while I talk on the phone, they're hearing you. And I think that would be, it's a really good way of teaching in a non-direct method. That is leading by example. That's it. It's communicating, showing communication skills, showing soft skills. Actively listening. So that's a term that you can find definitions for. But listening, and I think we use these discussions of actively listening in marketing a lot when we want to get work, is, oh, we're a firm that listens super well to everybody. Obviously, we say it differently than that. But yes, hopefully every firm and every person listens well. But we're not taught how to listen. So we have to work hard at it. Actively listening to me is actually listening and not speaking. It's putting aside any biases, putting aside opinions for a minute and listening to what somebody is really saying, or maybe what they're not saying because they're uncomfortable saying everything that they should, or maybe everything you think they should. So it's a very important skill to learn, and it's a challenging one to learn. So we're almost halfway. Gonna try to not go too fast or too slow so that there's some time for questions at the end. I know that Becky's put out a series of questions that I came up with that I'd like to look at when we're done, and I'd certainly take questions from anybody. So those are the really initial points of identification, engagement, and leadership. Again, a lot of this is purely on soft skills, purely on listening, communicating, teaching, understanding when a project has issues. What are the issues? Are the issues simply you're not getting the drawings done well, or somebody's really being difficult, or the program is just really a tough program and it's just not working on the site? Well, if it's not, or you have any of these issues, you have to figure out a way to appropriately convey that information so that you can continue with the project and you can continue solving the issues that your client has asked you to solve. One of the things that's difficult is being put into a project that's already vulnerable, especially if it's later in its phase, such as in the middle of CDs or beginning of CDs or something. And a lot of us in our careers will get or have got put onto a project to run a project or to help run a project that's already vulnerable. Nobody's telling us it's a vulnerable project. They're saying, okay, I'd have to have you work on this one. It's just tanking, we're way over budget and the client's upset and the consultants aren't cooperating and we only have 2 weeks to the deadline, 2 weeks to the deadline and all these kinds of things. And you're like, oh my goodness, you know what, how do I fix this? Well, you can certainly not always fix it 100%, but you can do the best you can. You can jump in and you can assess quickly what you believe to be the issues that are causing the vulnerability that are making the project go sideways. And that's when you do the assessment. Are these internal issues, external issues, combination thereof? Is it too much pressure from leadership to do a project that's just way too complicated based based on the scope and your available fee and the schedule for the project? Maybe they're just totally not in sync. That has to be pointed out, and you have to figure out the best way to move forward to compromise as best you can for the project's outcome. Jumping in midstream is difficult. I've had to do that a lot over my career. Kind of created a term of firefighting, and firefighting is dealing with how to solve problems on projects. And a lot of it is not really about architecture as it is about understanding people, understanding communication, and kind of simplifying what the issues are so then you can start dealing with them. You can assign different staff to handle some parts of it. You take a lot of responsibility as the leader, and then you can start moving forward with adjusting the project to improve it. And I can guarantee you that through doing that and then being honest to your team, to the leadership, and to your client about where things stand and what you're going to do to sort of turn them around, they can then really appreciate that point of view and you have a better chance of success. Certainly, not all clients are willing to hear things, and that's unfortunate. But you have to do your best in that regard. Then you get to a point of the project being out the door. Maybe it's under construction. Maybe it's not going to go to construction for a while, but you've completed your construction documents. So I think it would be a good time to do what I call the project retrospective. So you're really going to create an analysis that defines in a simple page. So I'll show you in a second. The project history. What were the milestones? You're going to discuss scheduled performance. Did you meet the milestones? Did you not meet the milestones? But it's not just did you or didn't you, it's why didn't it happen? Maybe there were internal issues, maybe there were external issues, maybe, the city held up plan check for 1.5 years and you had to go back in 8 times or 7 times or 3 times, whatever it might be, because of things that were outside of your control that maybe had nothing to do with the architecture side. Maybe they all had to do with things that the city needed the client to do. And that affected the schedule. But that's not on you. But if you just went by, oh, well, we didn't hit these milestones, leadership in the office can also be under a misunderstanding of why you got to where you were. I think it's important to describe the team chemistry. I think that's important from a future staffing standpoint of understanding who works well together and what kind of projects they work well on. There are going to be sweet spots for every person based on other staff or project type. And sometimes you have to put them together when they don't really work well chemistry wise. But then you have to figure out how to deal with that. And again, it's being open and communicating and talking. You're going to note about your quality control process. Does the firm have one? Do you do internal or external reviews? When were they done? And then not only were they done, but how were they handled with discussion with the team? Did you just hand off a set of red lines and say, hey, go do it? Did you walk them through, if you're the one doing the QC, Did you walk them through all the things that you commented on? And did you talk about, this is why I've written these red lines. These are the things we need to work on. Those teaching moments are critical to the success of the use of the QC in improving the documentation. I think it's important to review the good and the bad. And as I've said, it's really important to go over all this with your team. And it's a team generated document. I think it can't just be done by the project manager. And this is what it looks like. And this is just my example that I came up with as one that describes the project, the different phases. You can discuss whatever you want on the phases, milestones and schedules, the difference, the reasons why there were differences between the actual and the scheduled milestones. The QC process description, like we talked about. I think it's important to have post team interviews with your team. Come up with some questions for the team. What went well? What didn't? What they thought could be improved? What they liked? What they thought really well, because there could be stuff, and that tends to get forgotten about. There might be questions for firm leadership about what they thought on the process, but then you can inform them how the team thought things went and discuss those differences. And as the leader of the project, you have that not only ability to do that, but I think you have that responsibility to do that. As I said, what went well, what didn't. And then there's suggestions for improvement. This can be a very long analysis, can be fairly short. It depends on the project, depends on how much vulnerability there was, depends on the issues, et cetera, of course, obviously. But I think it can be helpful to retrospectively analyze how things went. And I don't think we do this nearly enough. We just immediately are moving on to the next project. We might have 3 projects concurrently, and you don't really have time in your mind to do this, but I think we need to take the time, even if it's an hour or 2, get together with your team, do the review, do the debrief that's listed here at the bottom. And then do the same thing with the leadership so that everybody's really on the same page about how the project's moving forward, how things went, how the team worked. It's just very important, I think, to the success of the next project and the continued growth of yourself as the leader and your staff, which then hopefully does what? Hopefully it does a reduction to the potential vulnerability of future projects, because you have a better idea of what to look for and how to deal with it. Hopefully. All right. Hypothetical projects. Oh, there are so many that I could think of. And as you can see, I don't necessarily have a real specific one here recorded. When I did this seminar for the AIA conference, it was really kind of engaging. I was able to engage the audience a little bit, come up with, walk on stage and come up with something that was pretty exciting about what we could do with an example project. Let's take one where project scenarios, you've got a really inexperienced PM. It's a large team. Let's say you've got on the order of 6 to 8 architectural staff on a project. And you've got a project manager that's been thrown onto it after schematics because there was nobody else in the office. It's a very experienced project manager. They probably have at least 30, 35 years of experience in the profession. But what they don't have is much experience in this project type. This could be, one project scenario would be multifamily housing, let's say, because that's a lot of what our firm does. So it's a lot of my experience. Maybe they haven't done much multifamily. Maybe they've done single family. Maybe they've done commercial. And there's a huge difference between understanding what goes into a commercial project, understanding what goes into a multifamily housing project, whether it's market rate or affordable or senior. And so this poor PM is trying to do their best. They really don't know how to proceed. And they're not getting a lot of support because the leadership doesn't understand that this person is not as experienced as they need to be and needs a higher level of support than you would think a person of that number of years of experience might require. So that's part of that's the main initial vulnerability of that project. It's leadership on the project specific basis is not experienced enough to know what to do with it. Fortunately, that can lead to poor team communications. They may be trying to do too much on their own because they don't know how to delegate and what to delegate to the staff. The staff could be experienced in multifamily housing, but they're all quiet and they do what their leader tells them to do. But the leader's not telling them to do things in a way that's most conducive to team engagement, trust, and getting the project done. So this PM is taking too much onto their plate. And then they don't communicate well. They just don't understand the benefit of quality communication, whether it's emails, team meetings. And as a consequence, that team has documentation issues because there are going to be big holes in the project. And then you get inevitably team fracturing. You get people not caring as much, being frustrated, not feeling trusted. And so this scenario of an inexperienced PM has now led to, with mediocre or medium or average communication skills, has led to a whole group of documentation issues, team fracturing, lack of trust, lack of team morale, and that's a downward spiral, right? So in this scenario, just it's a project that's going sideways. Another example, before we get to the turnaround component, another example would be, let's say it's really experienced project manager who's also the project architect and the job captain, because there's not enough people in the firm to handle this renovation project. And renovation projects, let's say it's for a university, and you've got a whole lot of different users. It's different than a renovation of a house. It's different than a renovation of doing a commercial TI space. Let's say it's for a university. Let's say it's a higher education classroom building or classroom space, along with some teaching classrooms, support spaces, and things like that. But it's in an existing building that's over 50 years old. That's a complicated project. And you have, let's say, maybe multiple departments at the university that you're having to deal with. But your staff doesn't know how to do this project. You do. And so you feel like you have to do more of it because you're the one with experience. And if you give it too much responsibility to the rest of your small team, you know in your mind that things won't get done, and they won't get done appropriately, not because the people don't care, not because they don't want to, because they just don't have that experience. Well, through the sort of the opposite of the first scenario, you're still developing team fracturing, you're still developing bad communication, and you're still going to have documentation issues. And you might have schedule issues, and you're going to work yourself to the bone with it. And it just doesn't work out well. So that's when you have to step back. If you're that experienced PM and say, I've really got to figure out how to engage my two other people. And what can I give them that's going to work well? And how can I help them learn what to do? Oh, I can go with them to the field and walk them through how to do the field measuring. And we can figure these things out in the field, and they can see it in person instead of giving them half figured out drawings and say, hey, just go take care of these things, and then being upset when it doesn't get done right. So those are two pretty quick examples of a hypothetical vulnerable project. How do you turn it around? Okay, you can change staff. That might mean changing PM in the first scenario, right? Getting one who's more experienced. I've had to do that in the past where I had to come into a project and take over for a PM because they just didn't have enough experience this way. That was part of it, but their leadership engagement was not very good. And so they were losing the team and losing the client. And this was 20 years ago, it was 10 years ago, and these things have happened on projects. And it's just, if you can understand that it's happening and then how best to assess the situation pretty quickly and then be, a very honest and transparent and engaging and empathetic leader, you can take care of a lot of difficult projects through those simple skills of listening, learning, teaching, and understanding people. So you're going to make some staffing changes. You're going to do some leadership engagement. You're going to continue to discuss and show listening and communication skills. Again, like an example earlier, I mentioned of you're talking on the phone and other people in the office can hear you. That's a very valuable thing that we can get in an open office that you can't get when everybody's in a closed office. Everybody's in their own individual office. And the folks that need to hear you on the phone can't because you're in your office. In a past firm, I had two young people that I was trying to teach and mentor in their career. And one of the things that the one who now is running the architecture department at that firm told me was that they really were learning so much because they were hearing me talk on the phone. And they were reading my emails that I CC'd them on. And they were trying to pay attention to the tone and the word choice and the honest diplomatic discussions that were going on either over the phone or in the written communication that were dealing with difficult subjects. And so they were just saying, hey, I'm learning so much from this. And at the time, I hadn't realized that there was so much availability of learning by just opening your ears, taking your headset off, not listening to music, let's say, while you're working, that you can get in an office environment. And that's why what we do as leaders is so important from the standpoint of how we talk and communicate on a daily basis. The impact is much broader than we might anticipate. So in conclusion, I'm going to give us some time for questions here. What are some of the key words that we've talked about or that I've discussed today that are really important for not necessarily, in this case, determining if a project is vulnerable, but understanding how to deal with it and to just deal with the general day-to-day work in our profession anyway, and be the best you can be and be the best that your staff can be. And you're going to help them do that. And you can help them do that through being honest, being thorough, and yeah, I'm reading, I'm sorry, being pragmatic, being straightforward, matter of fact. Don't get too high, don't get too low. I think that calmness and sort of, yeah, the not too high, not too low, that ability to just, okay, let something flow off your shoulders, take it in stride, and then figure out how to deal with it is really important to show to the rest of your staff how to handle situations. You're going to be showing that with respect, hopefully. And if you show empathy and transparency in things like making sure your team has the contract or has seen the contract on your project. So it's transparent to them what the firm's deliverables are for the project and what your fee might be. You have discussions on how you're dealing with fee and schedule. That transparency is critical. I think that the active listening component is also very important. That is not, and I most of the stuff is not stuff we're taught, right? It's not a class in architecture school at Berkeley on this or at University of Virginia where my son went. It's just not there. You're learning other skills. I think in college, you're hopefully learning things like how to work with people as much as you're learning the nuances of the different subjects you're taking classes in. Team sharing. Share with your team. And then all this is about soft skills. Everything that I've said, I think today is non-technical in nature, pretty much. And it's about developing your soft skills. So what do we have for the final takeaways? We have hopefully some ability as a team to identify vulnerability. And you can apply your skills when you identify that you have a vulnerable project. You're then going to create the engagement with a listening, respect, honesty. You're going to develop the team. You're going to engage with the team. And the more invested and engaged the team is, the better chance of success on any project you're going to have, regardless of whether it's vulnerable in a very tiny way or hugely more. We're going to improve leadership. You're going to improve your leadership or others in your firm's leadership by example. You're going to take problem situations. You're going to be working as a unified team. You're going to communicate them, and you're going to work better at open, honest communication with everybody. And you're going to continue to teach these skills, which are your soft skills, to your leadership in the office, out of the office with hopefully your consultants can get this because some are fabulous and some need some help. And that is where we are. And so now I think with 12 minutes or so left, I can open it up to questions that I posed that Becky put out there. You can see how people have responded to those. And if there's any other questions, I'm happy to take them. Hopefully this was helpful. Oops, okay. So the polls got, I think I came up with 5 questions, which are as follows. Have you ever felt you were in the middle of a vulnerable project, but were unable to either exit the project or improve it? 2, do you feel that a vulnerable project is a risk management issue for a firm? 3, how would you define vulnerable relative to an architectural project? As either needing special care, it's exposed, subject to jeopardy. 4, do you feel that schools or firms help you learn soft skills? And do you feel soft skills are important in the architectural profession? So those are the questions. I don't see
Leave it open for maybe another 20 seconds if that's okay.
Sure.
Almost, we've gotten a good number of responses.
Okay.
Right, about 10 more seconds. Okay. And here's how everyone answered.
All right, let me take a look. Okay, wow, okay. About 80%, 12. Okay. Um, okay, hopefully things that I've mentioned today will help those of you that said you're in the middle of a vulnerable project but were unable to either exit or improve it. I've pointed out some tools that you can use, either yourself or let others know about, to work on those projects, to get them better. You can't, and you can't solve everything. And sometimes it's just not possible. You feel that a vulnerable project is a risk management issue for a firm. Wow, okay, great, good job, because it is. So many things can lead to construction issues, contract issues, litigation. It's just, especially depending on the project type, it's a very challenging world. How would you define vulnerable relative to an architectural project? Okay. It's really all those things, right? A vulnerable project needs special care. Every project needs care, but when it's vulnerable, it especially needs special care. A project is exposed. You have more things exposed to risk when you have vulnerability and things that are not quite working, whatever they are. And I think it's subject to jeopardy. So maybe I typed it wrong, so I apologize. But yeah, it is definitely subject.
I apologize, that was my typo.
Do you feel that schools or firms help you learn soft skills? Interesting. So 38% of you felt that they had an education that helped you learn soft skills. That's great. I feel like I had a pretty good education, let's say at UC Berkeley, and as did my wife in architecture, and our son at the University of Virginia in architecture. And I'm not, I think my son might have gotten a better education on that point than I did at Berkeley, but I think that's also timing of who was teaching and their process at the time. And okay, I'm glad that there's no no's on 5. Because certainly soft skills are important in the architectural profession. They're important everywhere, right? So it's a very true statement, but glad everybody feels that way. So thank you to those of you who did answer. If there's any questions that anybody wants to raise, please feel free to raise them through Becky, and I'll be happy to address them.
You do have a question mark. I can read it to you if you'd like. Any tips on how to deal with firm principals or partners who are unwilling to make staff changes and or also have trouble communicating?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And honestly, I think I was asked that same question or a nearly identical question during the conference presentation. And even as the director of architecture at a firm, it's a tough one to understand how to bring it to a firm owner's attention and work with them to decide things need to change slightly. I think the best you can do is set up a time to have that conversation, and if possible, not just be 2 of you. Maybe if there's 2 partners or 3 partners, you could at least have 2 of them, or the principals or whoever it is that are in that high leadership level that you're talking about. And say, these are the issues that I'm seeing. And these are the risks that I believe are accompanying these issues, which I think are risks for the firm. And I think that making these following suggested changes would help reduce that risk. I mean, I think you might have to approach it from a risk management standpoint, get away from, uh, you know, maybe the specifics of a person versus a person and talk about it from an experience standpoint, or maybe it is a chemistry standpoint. And that it's affecting the potential risk. And I think maybe that's a way of approaching it that would get better uh, understanding by the other side. But yeah, that's a tough one. Hopefully that helps.
All right, that's all the questions. We did have another one that was just about putting your AIA number in the chat. You do not need to. We have your AIA number from when you registered. So we have your login and log out. And at this point, we are at 1:01 Eastern. So Mark, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, thank you for your time today. And we appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Really appreciate it. Hope you got something out of this. It's certainly a challenging subject to discuss. It's not like talking about how to draw something, which I can do as well, but I think it's a really important topic. So thank you all for joining. And again, you can, Becky will send out a communication post this with a link to actually get a copy of this slideshow. And if that would be of help to anybody. And again, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.